Welcome to today's podcast episode. And in this episode, I want to talk about some of the things that I think the industry is going to experience in the next, let's say, 10 to 15 years. And some of the things that the industry and contractors and, other industries, other industry professionals who are invested in the success of the industry can do in the attempt to, kind of ease things along and make it, I'll say it this way, to make it as less painful as possible. Because in some direction, some way, somehow, some people, some entities are going to find the next 10 to 15 years very painful. And oftentimes that pain comes from significant amounts of change in a short amount of time. Now, some of this pain that's going to, kind of, let's say, originate from change, some of this can be managed. And some of it can be mitigated and, let's say, damped down upon. Now, that's precisely what we're going to, kind of involve ourselves in this podcast episode. It's impossible to get away from and steer clear from all pain that is going to, let's say, come about because of the significant amount of changes that the industry is going to experience. But there are certain steps that we all can take in the, direction to, let's say, dampen down some of those pain points. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about in this podcast episode today. As an apprenticeship instructor, and we're talking about 18, I'd say probably about close to 18 years now. You're listening to somebody who really enjoys mentoring, who really enjoys conversing with apprentices of all, of the wide variety of ages. And interestingly enough, what used to be a lot of people in their 20s has also started to include some of the millennials that are, let's say mid to late 30s, excuse me. And this I find interesting for a few different reasons, but the main one being that the millennials are largely absent from the construction industry. And so because that large age bracket is conspicuously absent from the industry, one of the things that you're going to start to see is this lack of experience and this lack of age, this age gap that we have that has been created by a number of reasons. One of them being that we've woven this cultural narrative that you got to go to college to get a good job. And so the trades, they've experienced, let's say the millennials, and they're, they bought into the cultural narrative. And so they didn't obviously join the trade. So when I see somebody that's, mid to late 30s and they're in the trade, I'm like, this is a good thing. I like to see that, there's more people getting into the trades. They see them as a viable option. However, even those late, it depends on how you want to look at it, those older apprentices or younger millennials, doesn't really matter to me the perspective that you have. Even those individuals, as they come into the trades, they lack the time that we should have in the game. What I mean is, if they're 36 years old, if they're 38 years old, because they're starting to get to late 30s, in theory, it would be nice if they had 10, 15, maybe even close to 20 years of experience in. And indeed, if we were, if we could sit here and say that we're a reflective of a consistent, continual, progressive way where we've always got where our average age is, about middle of the road, because we've got representatives from every single age group, then we would have that. But we don't. And when you talk to young apprentices, you must live under a rock if you're unaware of just how problematic this issue is. Because when you talk to a lot of apprentices, they'll tell you, hey, what you see on the job is 50 to 55 and older and 30 and younger. That's what you've got. And what you don't have are a lot of 30 and 40-year-olds. They are conspicuously absent from, those in the trades. There are some of us, but we're very few. And so the astute individual recognizes and understands that a lot of the experienced individuals that are in the field, boots on the ground, getting the work done, are going to be eventually retiring, and their replacements are not going to be people who are in their 40s, as it should be. Instead, what you are going to find is that you're going to find young 30-year-olds in those positions. And you might be inclined to say, well, what's the problem with that? It just means that individual gets to be there longer, and there's opportunities for those younger people to take those positions. But as anybody who does the work and gets it knows, that 30-year-old is going to be forced into positions of leadership or management or role responsibilities far sooner than, number one, they would normally be, and number two, long before they've acquired a significant and wide variety of experience, which enables them to be able to handle the position or the role to the degree that they should. Their ability to step into roles because they have been vacated is a double-edged sword. It doesn't mean that it's all negative, but it doesn't mean that it's all positive either. And for those of us who have been actively participating in the dialogue and have been watching and have been mentoring young people and have been talking to industry professionals and players alike, we see the systemic problems that this has not only caused, but is going to cause in the next 10 to 15 years as the latter half of the baby boomers go to retire. It's going to leave this sizable gap that will also leave an experience gap. And this experience gap is going to bite a lot of people and a lot of companies in the rear. And those companies that don't just survive, but actually thrive, are taking steps now to change the way that they look and view and do things so that they can become those entities and industry professionals that don't just survive, but thrive. What do those steps look like? Well, I want to talk about at least 6 things that are on my mind that I believe that companies and industry professionals should actively be searching and seeking things out to do in order to change the narrative, to change the way that they view and their company is viewed so that they can not just survive, but thrive. Right? Number one, first and foremost, whether you get millennials involved in the industry from an age perspective or whether you get younger people, there's no two bones about it. You need to look at developing the next generation of apprentices. The registered apprenticeship program, the gold standard from the Department of Labor, is the prime way for you to get involved and to bring apprentices on board and to not just give them a place of employment, but to develop the next generation. Now, to be sure, you obviously want them to be developing your company. I 100% understand. But you cannot get involved in the apprenticeship program if your company is not involved in an apprenticeship program. The easiest way and the best way, there's a number of reasons why this is, but the easiest way to get involved into an apprenticeship program is to go down to a local union and which already has a very robust apprenticeship program that you can then get plugged into, and you can have apprentices come to work for you that you can help then develop the next generation. But one of the other ways that you also have to keep in mind when it comes to apprentices is that you yourself have to remember what it was like when you may not have, let's say, quote unquote, done your time in the respective trade that you're in an actual registered apprenticeship program. Well, if that's the case for you, then you need to remember what it was like being young and had no one to teach you. Or maybe you did have somebody pour into you when you were younger, and you need to take that and use it to your advantage. Because so often, young people, the very same thing that they complain about, not having companies take them seriously, not having field hands, journeymen, foremen, etc., take them seriously, when they get into those respective positions, they become the very thing that they fuss about. So it's incumbent on you as a company, as an owner, as your front line, whether it's foreman, et cetera, which that's going to be my next point, or my third point, and we'll get into it. But it is incumbent on you you set the standard. You set the tone. If you're actively looking to develop apprentices, it's just like from a safety culture perspective. It will start from the top. If you are opposed to safety because you don't see it as an investment in human resources and human labor that is your most valuable resource, but instead see it as a burden, it's the same thing. It's not going to work, right? It's going to be, it's going to be a continual fight uphill to enact or to deal with any of that. It's the same thing if that is how you view apprentices. If your company or the individuals the key personnel, if they don't view apprentices as one of the most significant ways to change the dynamics, change the direction, change the industry and culture, it's going to be a rough road. It's going to be a rough time on the road to change that is ultimately going to happen to your company. So you need to do and look into developing apprentices and change the mindset and culture and the behavior and understanding of what that ultimately means. And by all means, if you need to get plugged in to let's say a registered apprenticeship program, just drop me a line. You can go over to thewealthyironworker.com, go to the contact page, and you can send me an email. I'll get you connected with whoever you need to get connected with to get you involved. Would be my pleasure. Now, this takes me into point number 2, which is invest and develop them. Again, I was talking in point number 1, the first part of this, which is about, investing into apprentices themselves. I'm trying to sell the case of the apprenticeship model. I think it is the best way forward, but invest and develop in the actual apprentices that are coming to work for you. And here's what I mean. When you ask apprentices today, if you ask a lot of people today, and hopefully you're very well aware of who's working on your job, what do you likely see? You likely see, like I said earlier, 30 years old and younger, and you see 50 to 55 years old and older. And so you have 30 and 40-year-olds missing. They are missing in the enrollment process from the trades perspective. And even if you get them to come into the trades now, because there seems to be this renewed interest in the trades, it's very almost bizarre in a way, which I'll address in a different podcast episode. But even if you do get them from an age perspective, they don't have the experience. And so what does that look like then? Well, I'll tell you. I think what that looks like is there's a lot of institutional knowledge that is going to be left on the table and forgotten. And I think that the best way forward is not to try and train people up to be this jack of all trades, master of none, especially when you have this age gap and this experience gap coming ahead. No, I think that if you're looking at if you're an ironworker company, then you ought to be developing ironworker apprentices to be your ironworker journeyman, to be your next field hands. Same thing with electrical guys. If you're an electrical company, then that's what you should be developing. Somebody who is like a master in the electrical field. Same thing with pipe fitters. You should be looking to invest and develop them into their respective field so that 10 years from now, you don't have I'll make the numbers up, but 5 people who are masters of, who are they're jack of all trades and are not really masters in their craft. What do you want to be known in an age where the people who are key leaders of your industry are 30 and 35-year-olds who are perceived as young and immature because, well, I mean, 30 years old, you are young. Wouldn't it be better for you if you had, I've got iron workers that I have invested in. I'm an electrical contractor. I've got electrical guys. I've got masters of their trade. I don't have guys who are jack of all and master of none. I've got masters in their respective trade. It's all about perception at that point, perception and the ability to do the work. And far be it from me to ever advocate that you as a company, when you're looking to survive, not just survive, but thrive in 10 years from now, for you to advocate that you have guys who can do a little bit of everything. I'd rather have a few guys that are very good in whatever it is that they do. So that when I go out there and I'm competing against other companies in this not just time to survive, but thrive, I have the talent. I have the guys who work for me who are the masters of their respective trades. That's one way that we're talking about investing and developing them. The second way, and this is something that you need to be made aware of, is to realize that a lot of these individuals are, of course, going to be in the respective positions, whether it's foreman, superintendent, etc., a lot earlier than what they normally would be. Now, earlier I said that, when those 50 to 55-year-old guys, when they get 60 and they go to retire, somebody who's 45 would get to take their spot. Now, those of us who are in our mid-40s are still around, but we're so few that what's going to happen is those individuals who are 25 to 30 years old, they're going to find themselves with less time in the field to do those jobs, better off that they are masters of their trade. And get this, that they've also been developed for the very positions that they're going to take. Now, in an ideal world, they won't get to take them. They would take them in 10 plus years after that. But we don't have the skilled and experienced people. So we have to bridge this gap. Far better that we invest and develop them in that way, which is a great segue into the third point that I want to talk about, which is to ensure that your frontline employees, this includes your journeyman that you currently have working for you now, this includes your foreman, this includes your superintendents. By all means, aside from developing a culture from a company that prioritizes hiring and developing apprentices, you need to ensure that your frontline workers, that those are the ones that I just mentioned, that they're also invested in training up and developing the next generation. Because that's oftentimes an apprentice's complaint, is that journeymen and the like don't invest in me. They won't teach me because they think I'm going to take their job. That's the common complaint that I hear as an apprenticeship instructor, is that they're always concerned with the probability that the journeyman has expressed, I'm going to lose my job. And they've heard it so much that that's usually the claim for those who have not even said it and refuse to develop the next generation. Far better that you incentivize and you create some form of structure, that what ultimately happens is that when we're having apprentices and they become journeymen, that we've developed this thought process and this culture that not only just incentivizes that the journeyman comes along and trains them up. And then when those individuals you can clearly tell they're going to be good foremen, and you're going to obviously need to train up your next generation of foremen. Those journeymen don't want to do it. Let's train up the next generation that has been raised up. They get partnered up with these individuals. They get real one-on-one mentoring with foremen and superintendents. The last thing that you want to happen to your company is that 10 to 15 years goes by and number one, you're not involved in actively recruiting apprentices and apprenticeships with on-demand training and a wide variety, but you're also not investing into the current people you have working for you to develop the people who are working for you in the next 15 years. And then what happens is you're caught and you don't have the actual labor that you need to get done any real significant work. And this, to me, is going to be a rude awakening for the companies who are not intentional about what they're doing in developing the next generation. And then at the end of all of this, you get to a point where you're wondering by scratching your head and looking back and thinking to yourself, well, what in the world happened and where are all the people? Now, this sounds like a nefarious point, and there's a lot of people that have this perspective that, well, I'm not too concerned with it because, I'll just go out and I'll use headhunters, I'll use recruiters. The problem with that is that the recruiters are all pulling from the same diminishing pool of people, this dwindling of people with experience as others retire. It's quite frankly, it's a bad business model. Do I think that recruiters should be outright dismissed? No. But if you were to answer any of the questions and any of the points that I've made with that specific answer, I would tell you that you're very short-sighted. You want to be intentional about developing so that in 10 years from now, you're not trying to play catch up. You're not trying to play damage control. You're not trying to figure out what's happened. You are a decade into investing into those companies, into the guys that make up your company, and that who turn around and want to see the success of what you've got going on. You don't want to be caught on the back end of this. So there has to be some form of development and getting your journeymen and foremen and superintendents involved in this because they also need to realize that the industry is carried forward by those individuals who come in and, they need to be mentored. They need to be developed. Keep this in mind when you're looking down the future. And I don't mean like tomorrow, where's your next job? I'm talking about 10 to 15 years from now. And the next point that I want to discuss, because you might think, well, I'll go ahead and I'll get some training, I'll get some professional development that'll be focused on my company, etc. Okay, great, no problem. But here's the rub. The vast majority of training that is done in a construction industry company is typically tailored towards white collar office workers. Anecdotally, that's what I see. I see very, very little that is tailored towards or for foremen and superintendents. Once you get to the superintendent level, they seem to be welcomed. I'm not going to say country club because that'd be a slur, but they seem to be welcomed as part of the office. And those individuals seem to be, let's say, developed as if they're a project manager or whatever the case may be. But our foreman, general foreman, these individuals are largely you're very conspicuously absent from any and all training regiment, which is one of the reasons why, by the way, in every single foreman class that I have, I just clearly bring up stuff like the books like The 5-Minute Foreman by Mark Breslin, because it is a fantastic resource. Also, to kind of put a feather in the cap of registered apprenticeship programs with the union, you get foreman training, you get safety training, you get foreman training, first aid training, almost on-demand training. We do silica, lead. I mean, there's a whole host of things that we end up doing in the obvious attempt to bolster and support the contractor base as well as the apprentices that become journeymen. So if you're looking to, let's say, develop or bring in professional development to train your employees, you want to make and take special care to ensure that it does not specifically single out and focus on just your white collar workers, but also on your boots on the ground individuals that get the job done, your foreman, general foreman, superintendents. Because you want those individuals to then turn around and bring up the apprentices who become journeymen, who then need to become the next group of foremans, general foremans, and superintendents that your company needs. Point number 5 in this podcast is going to be, as far as developing recruitment, retention, etc., is to use technology to increase your attractiveness. Here's what I mean. You want to be, in the effort to stave off just not trying to survive but thrive, you want to be seen as a company who is actively interested and willing to go. We talk about this a lot. I've said this multiple times in different podcast episodes and certainly in different articles, but you don't run from conflict or, in this case, difficulty. You head straight into it. In this case, I know there's change coming off. I'm not going to try to put it off until the very last minute when it is the most painful thing to do. No, I see changes coming. I can look at it down the road and tell that it's there. I need to head this off now before it becomes an enormously large elephant in the room. Right now, it's a little baby elephant that I can eat one bite at a time. But when it becomes this massive elephant in the room, I now have to eat it one bite at a time. And it's going to take me a considerable amount longer to deal with the issues that I could have dealt with 10 years ago. And using technology to then let other people know, you want to be, let me say it this way. I'm a contractor that does not have an apprenticeship program. I am so used to people just coming and knocking on my door, maybe because I'm an established business in my area. But you've decided, hey, I need to train some things up. You listen to a podcast episode, they start talking about these various points that, interestingly enough, I'm talking about. And next thing you know, you go and get involved into an apprenticeship program. You sign a union agreement, which I highly encourage because there's a lot of benefits for you. But in addition to that, you want to be seen as a contractor that is pressing forward and looking at, let's say, harnessing the power of change and technology. Great. Young people are really adept at using technology. Whereas a lot of your experienced personnel, your superintendents and et cetera, that are 50, 55, 60, those individuals who are going to be retiring in the next 10 years, they're not adept at change. And change is coming, whether we like it or not. So leaning into the technological change that is going to come and bringing young people in to help you out, and then quite honestly using technology to your advantage to make, to create and sustain and change and develop the image that you need of your company so that other people are like, that sounds like the company that I want to come work for. That's where you want to be as far as I'm concerned. You want to be the company that wants to be known as the company that's not afraid of change, is willing to go the extra mile to get things done. And the change that's on the horizon is not, it's not this like large nefarious thing that you can't deal with. You've run headfirst to it and you're looking to actively take care of it. And when it's all said and done, you look at it and go, yep, that's the company I want to go work for. They don't want to stretch me too thin. They don't want to make me a, let's say, jack of all trades, but a master of none. Now, they want me and my expertise to continue to contribute to my company and the development and the growth, et cetera. And lastly, the sixth point that I'll go ahead and discuss with you here, and this is a big one. This is a real big one. and this one comes after using technology for obvious reasons, as we'll kind of explore it. But this is it: being honest about what it's going to take. Number one, being honest with yourself. If you're a business owner or you just happen to be in a key role, being honest about what it's really going to take. I'm not going to mince any words. I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to make it seem less than what it is. It is not. The next 10 to 15 years will not be easy. They're not going to be easy. All of the companies are in for some systemic and difficult change. The main difference, if you ask me, between the ones that survive and the ones that actually thrive are in large part going to be the ones that are going to adopt some of the talking points that are in this podcast episode, and then the ones who even go above and beyond that. If you know of any of them, I would love to hear about them. I'd love to talk with them. I'd love to research and see what they're doing different than some of the things that I'm developing. So, but being honest with yourself about what it's going to take, but here, being honest with the incoming generation about what it's going to take. And right now, I'm not just speaking to business owners and contractors at this point. I'm also speaking to industry professionals, whether it's from a union or not, where we can actively get the word out. Like, listen, it just because those individuals in the trades can find a lot of good job satisfaction, and they can find they wrestle with and find some sort of balance between what they do for a living and what they enjoy to do for a living, and who they work for and what they do, and being able to provide for their family and spend time with them, and yes, make some good money, does not automatically equate to it's a job for everybody. And if you want to cut through the fluff, if you want to, let's say, slice through all of the narrative and everything else, then I would much rather spend time investing in those individuals who already know, or at least have a better idea, that this is not going to be easy. This is going to be a specific intentional focus for me as a company, for you as an apprentice, and this whole industry at large. And how do we do that? Well, one way is obviously to use technology to increase our attractiveness and to also get the word out. Maybe it's a docuseries. Maybe it's a continual guest appearance on a podcast, or as a company, you start your own. I mean, there's a whole host of things that we could potentially do. There's a possibility, actually, I shouldn't say that. There's a probability that you can get involved with a local union in discussions with numerous individuals across this country about how many of them are actively working to, engage in pre-apprenticeships. That's how you can get them just getting involved into, oh, well, this isn't what I thought it was. Or this is exactly what I was looking for. There are a lot of ideas that we've talked about in this podcast episode, and there's even more that, I haven't. Some people are really adept at thinking outside the box. I'd love to have conversations with you if you've got some, but in the grand scheme of things, the company that is going to just survive, they're not going to do any of this. Indeed, some of them are going to limp along and barely make it across the 10-year finish line, the 15-year finish line, because they're not proactive, because they're not thoughtful and thinking about what they've got to do. They're not intentional in trying to change the trajectory of their business and the industry as a whole. But the one that thrives, the one that looks at the horizon, not just for jobs. Jobs are great. You got to have manpower to take care of them. But for the one that looks at the horizon 10 to 15 years down the line and says, what's it going to take for me to weather the storm of the latter half of the baby boomers retiring? It's not going to be recruiters, because the diminishing pool of people with experience it shrinks dramatically as those baby boomers retire. There are very few young Xers and older millennials in this game, and very, very few who've got a significant amount of time in, enough to give you the warm and fuzzy. So using and relying on recruiters, while not a complete waste of time, because you may very well be able to recruit some of them for your long-term, let's say long-term health and long-term sustainability and long-term growth, it's not a viable solution. Instead, for those who thrive and those who are looking at that down the line, they're actively going to invest in their company starting today. It's like that old adage, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. There may very well be companies who have begun this process 15, 20 years ago. It's unlikely, though. The vast majority of the companies that are out there today have largely been a part of the problem that the entire industry is facing. You want to change the next 10 to 15 years of what it looks like? Pay attention to what has been talked about in this podcast episode, and even look towards other sources, other ways to become even more creative, and begin investing in your company then. All right. Well, that's it for this podcast episode. I appreciate your time and your investment. Thanks for listening. And as always, stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.